Under the merciless sun of the Sahel, the marketplace in Ouagadougou stretched as far as the eye could see, a living tapestry of color, noise, and life. Vendors sat cross-legged before piles of millet, sorghum, and shea butter, their woven mats cracked in the heat as they shifted to adjust their wares. A young boy darted past with a bundle of fresh greens tucked under his arm, weaving between bustling shoppers whose faces bore the grit of decades-long hardship. Every so often a stray goat bleated, its bell tinkling against the muted roar of bargaining voices. Dust motes danced in golden shafts of light, as if celebrating each sale and every exchanged seed-eye. From a side stall piled high with roasted peanuts, the scent nutty and warm, came the laughter of two elderly women, their joy as vivid as the indigo of their robes. They teased each other gently about grandchildren, weaving memories as skillfully as any artisan wove baskets. Nearby, the rhythmic thump of a mortar and pestle echoed through the air, where a mother prepared ground pepper for a stew she would share with her family that evening. And everywhere, that simmering tension, the knowledge that until yesterday, many of these mothers and fathers tucked their children in with rumbling bellies, prayers whispered into the dark. Then, like the crack of distant thunder, the announcement arrived. A fielded loudspeaker perched on a battered Toyota wagon cut through the cacophony. Hear ye, by the order of President Ibrahim Traoré, the first shipment of rice, enough to feed 2 million souls for a month, has set foot on African soil. The words hung in the noonday air, solemn and electric. In the presidential residence, a 2-story compound framed by thorny acacias, Traoré stood tall behind a simple wooden desk. His uniform was immaculate, the jacket crisply pressed, brass, buttons gleaming like tiny suns, yet his eyes held the same fire they had when he was a lieutenant marching through rebel-torn bush. Beside him, advisors from across the continent, Kenyan agriculturists, Nigerian logistics experts, Senegalese trade delegates, exchanged nods of cautious triumph. On the wall behind, a large map of Africa bore dozens of colored pins, green for cooperative farms, yellow for transit hubs, red for distribution centers. Each pin represented a farmer's sweat, a family's dream, a community's lifeline. Traoré lifted the smooth stone from his pocket, rain-worn, heart-shaped, gifted by his grandmother, and held it up for all to see. One stone can start an avalanche, he intoned, voice low but carrying the weight of conviction. Today that stone rolls across our lands, feeding mouths, kindling hope, and shattering the ivory chains of dependency. Back in Ouagadougou, the marketplace erupted. Vendors dropped their wares to embrace neighbors. Children leapt in dizzying circles. Baskets and bowls once empty were hastily filled, and a single grain of rice, so simple, so humble, felt like the most precious jewel. Women who had known only the ache of hunger wept at its miracle. The sun, once oppressive, now seemed softer, as if smiling upon the rebirth of a people. Beyond Burkina Faso's borders, the news rippled outward. In Nairobi, Amina stood at dawn in her fields, inspecting rows of maize and groundnuts now lush from recent rains. She had been a part of the cooperative since its earliest days. Her hands cracked from toil, her spirit tempered by loss. But today, she wore a look of fierce pride. She pressed her palm to the soil and whispered thanks to the ancestors for the land, and for the countless farmers who had shared seeds and stories, knowledge and courage. Their collective strength had woven this great tapestry of food security. Yet Washington was convulsing with uncertainty. In the Oval Office's Situation Room, aides tapped their screens, tracking shipping manifests and trade data. Aides to former President Trump, pulled back into advisory roles by his massive base, argued that Africa's move was a direct challenge to American hegemony. We must respond, they declared, drafting tariffs on rice exports and threatening sanctions. But the room was divided. Some saw opportunity in partnership rather than punishment. Senators spoke out on the Senate floor, some with alarm, others with admiration. Headlines in the Washington Post and the New York Times debated whether America's century-long aid strategy had finally met its match. Across cafes in Dakar, Kinshasa, and Accra, young entrepreneurs raised toasts to the Traoré effect. Tech startups raced to link smallholder farmers to digital marketplaces, inspired by this triumph of grassroots organization. Massive infrastructure projects, from railroad upgrades in Tanzania to irrigation canals in Mali, found new political backing. And university lecture halls buzzed with a single question: can Africa feed itself and then feed the world? Meanwhile, within Traoré's own cabinet, teams worked around the clock to ensure this was not a one-off victory. Agricultural ministers drafted long-term policies for crop diversification. Financial ministers negotiated favorable loan terms for rural cooperatives. Health ministers planned nutrition programs to pair with rice distribution, enriching diets with vitamins and protein. Each initiative was built on the principle that real aid is not a gift, but a partnership, one that begins and ends with respect. For Africa's farmers, as the rainy season blossomed across the Sahel, fields once brittle and gray transformed into seas of green. Dust storms, a daily curse, gave way to gentle mists that nourished millet and sorghum alike. Traoré traveled by helicopter to remote villages, greeted not by applause but by silent nods of gratitude and resilience. He knelt in the dirt, running his fingers through the soil, remembering his grandmother's stone and the avalanche it had set in motion. On the steps of his palace one evening, under a sky painted with an African sunset's fiercest oranges and purples, Traoré addressed a crowd that numbered in the hundreds of thousands. His voice, broadcast live across 54 nations, carried a tone equal parts soldier's steel and grandfather's warmth. "We have shown the world what Africans can do when we trust ourselves," he said. "We are not beggars. We are architects of our destiny." And as cheers rolled across the continent, a new chapter unfurled, one penned by the hands of those who had tilled the soil, not by the pens of distant diplomats. In quiet Kenyan villages, in bustling Nigerian metropolises, and in the farthest reaches of Mozambique's coast, the harvest festivals that year were larger, more jubilant than anyone could remember. Children danced beneath canopies of maize stalks. Women sang songs of renewal. Elders blessed the earth that had finally returned their dignity. And through it all, a single stone, talisman of an avalanche, rested in Traoré's pocket, a reminder that true revolutions begin with simple, unwavering belief.